They called it the meat grinder, a hill that swallowed men whole and spat out nothing but silence. May 1945. Okinawa, the last great battle of the Pacific, a place where the earth itself seemed to bleed. Rain fell in sheets that day, turning dirt into red mud, turning men into ghosts, and somewhere near the top of that ridge, a medic with no weapon was climbing. His name was Desmond Doss, Private First Class, United States Army. But to the men around him, he was something else entirely. A mystery. A man who refused to touch a rifle, yet walked into gunfire. It began days earlier. The Americans were ordered to take Hacksaw Ridge, a jagged cliff rising 400 feet above the valley. At the top waited entrenched Japanese forces. Artillery, machine guns, and men who would not surrender. The assault was supposed to be simple. Go up, take the ridge, hold it. But everyone who went up never came back down. The air smelled of cordite and salt. Ships fired from the sea. Shells whistled overhead, tearing open the hilltop. The ground shook like the end of the world. Doss watched stretcher after stretcher roll by. Faces wrapped in white cloth, boots hanging loose. He'd seen death before, but never like this. He tightened the strap on his medic bag. Inside, bandages, morphine, splints, scissors, no rifle. No grenades, only faith, and a quiet promise he made to himself long ago, to save life, not take it. When his unit first met him, they didn't understand. A soldier who wouldn't fight? A medic who wouldn't carry a gun? They mocked him, called him coward, said he'd get them all killed, but he never shouted back. He just smiled and said softly, while others are taking life, I'll be saving it. The climb began before dawn. The rope net swayed against the cliff face. Hands blistered, boots slipped. The sea wind howled beneath them. At the top, silence. Then the jungle erupted. Machine guns burst to life. Mortar shells rained down. Men screamed, ducked, vanished into smoke. Doss hit the ground. He could feel the heat of the shells on his back. He crawled toward the nearest cry. A man's leg was gone. He pressed a bandage, tied it tight. Hold on, Doss whispered. I've got you. The line broke within minutes. The hill turned into chaos. Men ran for cover, slipping in the mud, dragging the wounded behind them. Japanese soldiers emerged from tunnels, bayonets flashing, firing at shadows. The sky was on fire, and through it all, the medic kept moving, crawling, dragging, praying. Hours passed. The ridge was littered with bodies. The order came to retreat. The survivors climbed down the ropes in silence, one by one. But Doss didn't move. He looked at the ridge, smoke rising like ghosts into the twilight, and heard the faintest sound. A cry. Somewhere up there, someone was still alive. He hesitated, looked at the dark slope below. No one would blame him for leaving. No one would know, but he turned back toward the fire and went alone. The night swallowed him whole. He moved like a shadow through the carnage, every breath slow, every heartbeat louder than the wind. A flare burst overhead, white light across the torn landscape, bodies everywhere, shell holes filled with rainwater. Then another cry, closer this time. He found the man, a chest torn open, barely breathing. Doss knelt, pressed his hands to the wound. Stay with me, he whispered. He bandaged him, lifted him onto his shoulders, and carried him to the cliff's edge. But the ropes were gone, so he tied his own rope, wrapped it around the wounded man, and lowered him down. The man disappeared into the mist. Seconds later, a shout from below. He's down safe! Doss exhaled, then turned back toward the ridge. Another cry, another life. He went again. Each trip was slower. His legs trembled. His hands bled, bullets cracked above his head. Mortars thumped the ground nearby. Still he moved. He whispered the same words each time. Please, Lord, help me get one more, over and over, until his voice was gone. Below the cliff, the men stared in disbelief. Every few minutes, a new stretcher appeared through the fog, lowered by a single rope. It was Doss working alone, saving one man after another, while the battle still raged around him. By dawn, he had carried out dozens, his uniform soaked in blood, not his own, his hands raw, his body near collapse. But when they found him, he was still moving, still searching. The officers could hardly believe it. They had counted 75 men saved, some barely breathing, all alive because of one man, a medic who wouldn't carry a weapon, a man the soldiers once called coward, now called hero. And as the sun rose over Hacksaw Ridge, the field fell silent. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the smoke away. Desmond Doss sat on the edge, hands trembling, eyes closed. He'd seen hell that night. But he'd also seen something else, the power of faith, the weight of mercy, and the unbreakable will of a man who refused to let war decide who he was. The next morning came without sunlight, just smoke, and the smell of gunpowder. The ridge that had once been a hilltop fortress was now nothing but broken trees and shattered bodies. But the battle wasn't over, not yet. The Japanese regrouped overnight. Hidden tunnels, hidden guns. They knew the Americans would climb again. They were waiting, and once more, the order came, move out, take the ridge. Doss tightened the strap of his medic bag. He had barely slept. His hands shook as he tied the laces of his boots. His commander looked at him. Doss, you sure you can go back up there? Doss nodded. I can't leave them behind. They climbed again. Up the same ropes, up the same wall of death. Every man knew what waited at the top. But they climbed anyway. When the first boots reached the ridge, the world exploded again. Machine gun fire ripped through the morning haze. Mortar shells slammed into the dirt. Men dropped where they stood. Doss hit the ground, rolling behind a rock. He looked up. The sky was filled with black smoke, the sound of bullets slicing through air like angry bees. A man screamed nearby. Doss crawled toward him. The soldier's leg was torn apart by shrapnel. He pressed a tourniquet, whispered a prayer, and dragged him behind cover. Another explosion. Dirt rained from above. The blast knocked Doss onto his back. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the ringing started. His ears felt like they were bleeding. His head spun. But when he opened his eyes, he saw more wounded and kept moving. Hours turned into madness. The ridge was a storm of noise and chaos. Japanese soldiers charged from their tunnels with bayonets fixed. Grenades rolled through the mud. Doss moved like a ghost among the fallen. Bullets hissed past his helmet. Blood soaked his uniform. He carried one man, then two, then three. He patched wounds with whatever he had left. Used belts when bandages ran out. Used prayer when hope ran thin. Then, the worst sound of all, the click of a grenade landing nearby. It bounced once, twice, and stopped inches from his hand. He dove. The explosion lifted him off the ground. Silence. For a moment there was nothing but white. A dull ringing in his ears. He couldn't move his right arm. Shrapnel had torn through it. He looked down, blood pulsing from the wound. He pressed a bandage to it, tightened his belt around his arm, and kept crawling. Minutes later, he found two soldiers pinned under rubble. He dragged one free, then the other. One of them whispered, "Duck." "You're hit," Doss just nodded. "I'll patch it later." He wouldn't stop. By sunset, the ridge was once again covered in smoke. The second assault had failed. The order came to retreat, and again. Men scrambled for the ropes, sliding down as fast as they could. But once more, Doss stayed behind. He could still hear cries in the distance, wounded, trapped, left behind. He couldn't leave them. Not yet. He crawled into the smoke, dragging himself by one arm now. Every movement a burst of pain. He found a soldier with his legs crushed under a fallen beam. The man was sobbing, begging to be shot. Doss looked him in the eyes. "Nobody. You're going home." He used a shovel as leverage, lifted the beam enough to pull him free, then tied a rope around his chest and dragged him toward the cliff. It took nearly an hour. When he finally lowered the man down, he whispered again, "Please, Lord, help me get one more." The night came fast. Tracer rounds zipped through the darkness. The jungle glowed red and green with gunfire. Doss had no morphine left. No bandages, only water. He tore pieces of his uniform to wrap wounds. He whispered to the dying. He prayed over the silence. He didn't know how many he had saved. He didn't care. Every heartbeat meant one more chance. One more life. Then he heard footsteps, fast, close. He turned. A Japanese soldier stood just a few feet away. Rifle raised, Doss froze. The soldier stared back at him. Both men breathing heavy. For a second, time stopped. The soldier hesitated, then lowered his weapon. He saw the medic's Red Cross armband. He turned and vanished into the smoke. Doss exhaled, trembling. The war had rules written in blood, but mercy still existed, even here. As dawn broke, the ridge was quiet again. The Americans below looked up, expecting no one to return. But through the mist, A figure appeared, a man covered in dirt and blood, limping, still carrying another soldier on his back. It was Doss. He collapsed near the ropes, and for the first time in 2 days, he allowed himself to rest. When the medics below treated him, they counted 60 wounded men saved during that second assault alone. Many swore it was impossible. But every stretcher told the truth, and as Doss drifted into sleep, he whispered again, "Just one more." Even in his dreams, he wasn't done. The sun rose pale and tired over Okinawa. Smoke still drifted from the ridge. The guns had fallen silent. The war was almost over. But the echoes never stopped. They said one man stayed longer on that ridge than anyone should have lived. Some didn't believe it. Others swore they saw him, a figure moving through smoke, bandaged, bleeding, carrying another man across the edge of hell. That man was Desmond Doss. When they finally pulled him down, he could barely walk. Shrapnel had torn his leg. His arm hung useless at his side, but his eyes, they were still alive. He refused the stretcher, said others needed it more. He just sat there, mud covering his face, watching the ropes sway in the wind. He had saved 75 men. Some said more. He never counted. He just kept whispering the same words, "Please, Lord, help me get one more." The Battle of Okinawa dragged on for weeks. Each day was a copy of the last. Fire, thunder, screams. Men fought for inches, then died for them. But Doss, he kept going. Even after his wounds, he refused to leave. He treated men while shells exploded nearby. He prayed over the dying, bandaged the living, and never once raised a weapon. Then came the shell that finally stopped him. It landed close, too close. The blast threw him through the air. Metal tore into his leg. He hit the ground hard, pain ripping through him like lightning. The men around him yelled for medics. He waved them away. "There's others worse off," he said. He tore off his own belt, made a tourniquet, and crawled toward another wounded soldier. He dragged that man to safety hard on his hands and knees, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Hours later, a stretcher team reached him. They lifted him gently. He smiled weakly and said, "Take care of the others first." Even in agony, he thought only of them. As they carried him down, another explosion struck nearby. The blast threw one stretcher-bearer off balance. The stretcher tipped. Doss fell, rolling into a ditch. The pain was unbearable, but as fate would have it, he landed beside another man, a soldier with a shattered arm. Doss looked at him, then at his own broken body and said, "Here, you use my bandage." He tore the splint from his own arm and gave it away. Even then, his instinct was to save. They finally reached the field hospital at dusk. Surgeons rushed to stabilize him. He'd lost so much blood they weren't sure he'd survive the night, but he did. Some said his faith kept him alive. Others said his sheer will refused to let go. Days later, as medics cleaned his wounds, a jeep arrived with a stretcher. On it lay his Bible, the same one he carried through every battle. Lost somewhere on that ridge, it had been found by the very men he had saved. They went back for it, risked their lives for it. Because they couldn't bear the thought of him losing something so sacred. That small act broke him. For the first time, Desmond Doss wept. When the fighting ended, the men returned home, some with scars, some without limbs, all with stories of the medic who went where no one else dared. His story spread quietly at first, told in barracks over whiskey and silence. Her tale soldiers told when words failed to explain what they'd seen. They said he never cursed, never shouted, never ran, just prayed, and somehow men lived. October 12, 1945. Washington, D.C., the air was crisp. The war was over. The world was trying to heal. Desmond Doss, still limping, stood before President Harry S. Truman. The president looked at him, this thin, quiet man with gentle eyes, and said, "I'm proud of you, son." He placed the Medal of Honor around Doss's neck, the first conscientious objector in American history to ever receive it. The medal shone under the lights, but Doss looked down, almost shy. He didn't see it as glory. He saw it as grace. He whispered again, "I was just doing what I had to do." Back in Japan, the news spread slowly. To the soldiers who had fought against him, it was almost unthinkable. An enemy who refused to kill. Some called him foolish. Others called him divine. A Japanese officer later said, "In war we feared men like him the most, because we could not understand them." Years passed. The world changed. The jungle grew over the scars of war. Hacksaw Ridge became quiet again. Just another hill in Okinawa, but the ground still remembered. So did the souls. Doss returned once more years later, older now, slower. But when he looked up at that ridge, he saw everything again. The ropes, the smoke, the faces, the prayers. He knelt, placed a hand on the earth and whispered, "Thank you for letting me serve." For a moment, the wind moved softly through the grass. It almost sounded like voices, the ones he'd saved, the ones who never came home. He stood in silence. The same silence he once feared. Now it felt like peace. Desmond Doss lived a long life. He never sought fame, never boasted. He just built a small house, planted trees, and prayed every morning. He said the world didn't need more soldiers. It needed more healers. When he passed away in 2006, veterans gathered to honor him. Men who owed him everything. Men who had once called him coward. They cried, because they knew now what courage really meant. Today, his name rests in history books. His medal hangs in museums, but his legacy isn't made of metal or ribbon. It's in the lives he saved, the faith he carried, the mercy he showed, in a place where mercy shouldn't exist. They say the jungle still whispers his name when the wind shifts, that if you stand at the edge of Hacksaw Ridge and listen closely, you can almost hear it, a quiet voice in the distance. "Please, Lord, help me get one more."